Mother, tell your children not to walk my way. Tell your children not to hear my words, what they mean, what they say. Mother, Mother, can you keep them in the dark for a while? Can you hide them from the wedding world? Oh.
Now, I read that quote on Thursday, and it kind of set me off because even though I will sit here and tell you that I don't think the wrestling media has a huge influence on the ratings per se, though I do doubt that because I do think that the internet community, particularly when it comes to wrestling, does create a buzz about wrestling events. That definitely has been shown with last year's and the year before's One Night Stand, where that was basically geared for diehard wrestling fans, the internet wrestling community wrestling fans, and it came off hugely successful without a doubt. So I have a problem with that. And I also have a problem with him saying, oh, well, how are we to blame? Well, here's how you have to blame, because the wrestling death list. Why is it that the only guy who has attacked this list for the utter crap that it is, and for those of you that don't know what the wrestling death list is, it's the list that Mark Merrill has been running around with going, look at all these wrestlers who died in the last however many years. Okay, here's the problem with the list. The list is crap. And the fact that Torch or the Observer or Brian Alvarez, as far as I know, have not attacked this list is utter crap. I've found one guy who has attacked the list, and that's Bob Ryder from OneWrestling.com. He's the only guy. I haven't seen, you know, I've seen Messler on television. I haven't seen him once bring up the fact that that list is so crappy, it's not even funny. And let me explain to you why it is that way. Okay, for those of you that have not seen the list, I'm going to include a link to the list from the Sun. This is the list from the Sun that I went from. So, let's see, where is it here? Here we go. Okay, there's around 140 wrestlers on this list. Of that 140, okay, the entire 140, and that includes what they say full-time wrestlers, which have been wrestlers in the WWE, WCW, that type of thing, going back to the 80s, and also indie wrestlers who, you know, are guys who, in my opinion, were doing drugs before they even got to either of the main stages, so I don't know why you would include those on this list, and also guys, international guys, that they know of. Okay, of that 140, 78 of them, 78 of those deaths had nothing to do with suicides or drugs, and I included, when I went through this, 78, I counted them personally, about 78 of them had nothing to do with drugs, nothing to do with suicides, and only a few of them I included had heart attacks, because I included all of the other guys that had heart attacks, because you could say, well, they had heart attacks because of drug issues that they had before. The only ones that I said, well, I won't include those guys were because of guys that particularly said on the they didn't die from drug-related heart attacks. 78. Of those 78, 26 of them were any wrestlers of note. Okay, these were non-indie wrestlers. Now, a lot of people say, well, you should include the indie wrestlers, but the indie wrestlers never got to the WWF. The indie wrestlers never got to WCW, and the indie wrestlers never got to any of the major stages. They had drug problems before they ever got there. They could have had drug problems from the time they were teenagers. You could argue that the reason why they never got to the WWF or WCW or whatever were because of the fact that they had drug issues. So that's crap. Okay, of 16 of the rest that are left, okay, after you've taken off the 78, after you've taken off the 26, of those 16 that are left, only 16 ever worked for the WWF in their history. Only 16 ever, and I'm talking about maybe they only did one. I could only remember them ever doing one stint, one maybe match. You know, worked for the WWF, and most of those were from the 80s and 90s when drugs were far more rampant. I mean, in the 80s, drugs were just rampant, and they were rampant everywhere. Steroids were legal back then. Yes, they were legal, boys and girls, believe it or not. And cocaine was a big, big deal back then. Then you had the 90s, and I just saw a video of, and I'll probably include its link too, of William Regal talking about the fact that most of the drug problems we see today, you know where they came from? They came from WCW. That's where they came from. The WWF was considered the cleaner of the two promotions. We all knew that back then. Why is the wrestling internet sites, particularly the high-quality news sites, not bringing this fact up? Why is it that only Bob Ryder is the only guy bringing this up? I do not get it. I don't understand this, and it just shows, and it really irks me that none of these sites are willing to defend the WWE on this. You know why? Because they're biased against the WWF. This is a witch hunt, folks. That's what this is. This is a media witch hunt, and the news sites are just sitting on their hands going, well, we don't like WWE anyways. We want changes, so we're just going to sit here and let it happen. And they're not doing anything about it. And it's crap. It completely is. What are they going to get from this? They're going to get Congress oversight, which is going to be stupid because nobody understands exactly what that is. No one understands what wrestling is when you get to Congress. We're going to spend like 4 days, Congresses of WWE and whoever else is up there, explaining to them about the wrestling business because they have no concept of the wrestling business. And why in God's name is wrestling being brought in front of Congress before boxing? Okay, boxing's drug policy is ludicrous, and most people know that. This is just so moronic to me that none of these sites, the Torch, the Observer, or Brian Alvarez, will not bring any of this stuff up. They will not attack this list. They will not go after it because they don't want to look like bad guys. Well, at some point, you're going to have to look like a bad guy. I'm sorry, you are, because you guys should be defending this business. You can defend it by saying, hey, the road schedule needs to be less. The drug policies maybe need to be a little more enforcement, but explain the reason why the drug policies are the way they are. Everybody knows why they're the way they are. Explain that they're far better than they were in the 90s. Explain about competition. Compare the fact that back in the 70s when the AFL and the ABA were around, both the NBA and the NFL looked the other way and let guys who had questionable, ethics maybe, and who wouldn't normally be in their leagues because there was stuff, you were competing for talent. And when you start competing for talent, things like this happen. Okay, doesn't make it right, but it happens, and it should be brought up. And the fact that, I watched Metzler on television talk about the list and not bring up the fact that the list is crap, because it is crap. And the fact that only one guy, I can only find one guy who's willing to go after this list, is just amazing to me. If somebody else can show me where they've gone after this list, I would love to see it, because I can't find it, and it's really irking me. And that is where, the internet wrestling media needs to stand up and say, okay, maybe we are to blame. Maybe we're not going after the WWE. Maybe we're not defending the WWE like we maybe should, even though we don't want to, because of our own personal bias against WWE, and particularly against Vince McMahon. Because that's why the media is going so hard on this, is because, a lot of them still feel like, oh, well, Vince McMahon made us look stupid during the steroids scandal around '92, so we're going to go after him again, which is such crap and such moronic bullshit that it's not even funny. And the wrestling media needs to bring them up on this instead of cowering in their little corners and saying, well, if we bring it up, we're not going to be considered real journalists. They don't consider you real journalists anyways. And the fact that none of you are willing to point out on any of your sites that probably the people that want this to go to Congress more than anybody else are the boxing journalists who look at wrestling as a bad thing because they see it as the reason for boxing's dwindling downfall and not the problems within boxing, and why boxing should be in front of Congress before pro wrestling should. Ugh. Anyways, I was going to make this video before, now I have. Again, I'm going to include some links, you guys can check it out. If you're subscribed to any of the major news sites, please voice your opinions on this if you agree with me, because I am really irked about this. I really am, and I have been irked about it for a while. So, anyways, I'm out. Have a good one.